She was 18 years old and owned nothing but the clothes on her back, $17 in a linen pouch, and a single, smooth stone she kept in her pocket. With that money, she bought a worthless mining claim on the highest ridge above the town of Cottonwood Bend, a place no one had bothered with for 30 years. But what her father and the town below never knew was that sealed behind a loose stone in the dugout's hearth was a history and a future that would change her life forever. Settle in and listen close to the story of Lucy Hayes, and let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from tonight. Lucy Hayes learned the world through her hands, and her first teacher was her grandfather, Elias Hayes. He was a stonemason, a man who spoke little but understood the language of granite and limestone as if it were his native tongue. From the time she was old enough to walk without stumbling, Lucy was his shadow. She followed him to the quarries west of town, her small fingers tracing the cool, rough faces of newly split rock. He never gave her toys, but he gave her tools. A small chipping hammer with a worn hickory handle, a plumb bob of polished brass, a folding rule made of boxwood, and marked with figures she learned before she learned her letters. He taught her to see the hidden lines in a stone, the grain that told you where it would break clean and where it would shatter into useless rubble. "Listen to it, Lucy girl," he would murmur, tapping a boulder with his hammer, the sound a dull thud or a clean ring. "Everything has a voice, if you're quiet enough to hear it." He taught her that a foundation was not just a matter of stacking stones, but of understanding weight and balance, of making something that would stand against the push of the seasons and the slow, heavy hand of time. He was a patient teacher, and she was a patient student. And in the long, quiet afternoons of her childhood, she absorbed his craft, not as a series of lessons, but as a way of being in the world. Her mother, Eleanor, was the source of the home's warmth, a woman whose presence was a gentle hum of activity, the smell of baking bread, the rhythmic clack of a knitting needle, the soft melody of a song hummed while she mended a shirt. But it was Elias who gave Lucy her stillness, her self-reliance. When her mother died of a fever in Lucy's 14th year, the warmth in their small house seemed to gutter and go out, leaving behind a cold silence that her father, a man more comfortable with ledgers than with grief, could not fill. Elias, however, understood. He didn't offer empty words of comfort. Instead, he took her to the creek bed and showed her how to find the smoothest, hardest stones, the ones tumbled by the water for 1,000 years. He gave her one with the perfect, delicate imprint of a fossilized fern, a tiny ghost of a leaf trapped in stone. "See?" he said, placing it in her palm. "Even the hardest things can hold a memory of something beautiful. Don't you forget that." That stone became her most treasured possession, a tangible piece of his quiet wisdom. It lived in her pocket, its smooth weight a constant, grounding presence. Elias passed 2 years later, leaving a void that felt as vast and silent as the mountains themselves. Without him, and without her mother, the house became just a building, and her father a man she lived with, not a family. His remarriage a year after that was a practical matter, he explained. Agnes was a widow from the next town over, a woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper sense of propriety. She brought with her an orderliness that scrubbed away the last traces of Eleanor's gentle chaos. The worn armchair, where her mother used to read, was reupholstered in stiff, unwelcoming damask. The scent of yeast and cinnamon was replaced by the sterile smell of lye soap. Agnes saw Lucy not as a daughter to be embraced, but as a problem to be managed, a living, breathing reminder of the wife who had come before. Lucy's competence, the skills her grandfather had taught her, were an affront. A young woman had no business knowing how to sharpen an axe or mix mortar. Her quiet self-sufficiency was read as insolence. Her father, caught between the memory of a love he had lost and the demands of the woman who now shared his bed, chose the path of least resistance. He grew distant, his conversations with Lucy becoming brief and stilted, his eyes rarely meeting hers. She spent her days in solitude, finding comfort in the solid, predictable world of work, mending the fence, resetting a loose stone in the walkway, tasks that had a clear beginning and a satisfying end. She was becoming a stranger in her own home. The foundation of her life, slowly, silently cracking beneath her feet, and she knew, with the same certainty, that she could read a fault line in a piece of granite, that it would not hold for much longer. The end came, not with a shout, but with the dry rustle of paper. It was a Tuesday evening in late spring, the air still holding the chill of the high country melt. Her father and Agnes called her into the parlor, the room that was now entirely Agnes's domain, filled with dark, heavy furniture that seemed to absorb all the light. Her father sat in a straight-backed chair, his gaze fixed on a point on the far wall, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. Agnes, however, looked directly at her, her expression one of grim satisfaction. On the polished table between them lay a deed of sale and a bank ledger. "Lucy," her father began, his voice thin and strained, "Agnes and I have decided to sell this house. We'll be moving to her family's property near Sterling. It's a better opportunity." He paused, and Agnes filled the silence. "You are 18 now, of legal age. It is time for you to make your own way in the world. We have provided for you." She pushed a small linen pouch across the table. The coins inside made a dull, dismissive clink. "There are $17. It is a generous amount for a girl starting out." Lucy looked from the pouch to her father's averted face. There was no argument in her, no plea. She had watched this moment approach for months, the way a person on a plane watches a distant storm cloud grow and darken and roll inexorably closer. The house was already sold. The decision was already made. She was an item in a ledger that had been closed. She did not cry or raise her voice. She simply nodded once, a small, sharp movement of her head. She took the pouch, the weight of it, both insignificant and immense. "I'll get my things," she said, her voice even. Agnes gave a curt nod. "Be gone by morning. The new owners will be arriving before noon." Lucy went to her room, the small attic space that had been hers since childhood. There was little to pack. A change of clothes, her grandfather's folding rule, the small chipping hammer. She wrapped them in a wool blanket, tying the bundle with a length of rope. Lastly, she took the fossil stone from the small box on her nightstand and slipped it into her pocket. She did not look at the room, did not allow herself to feel the loss of it. She was already gone. She walked down the stairs and out the back door, not looking back at the man who was her father, the man who was now staring intently at the polished surface of the table, as if the answers to all things were written in the grain of the wood. The journey began in the pre-dawn gray, the town of Cottonwood Bend, still asleep under a thin blanket of mist. Lucy walked not west toward the flatlands, or east toward the next town, but north, straight up into the mountains that loomed over the valley like silent, watching giants. The main road quickly gave way to a logging track, and then to a narrow game trail that switchbacked steeply through the dense pine and aspen. The air grew cooler, thinner, fragrant with the scent of damp earth and pine needles. The sounds of the town, the distant clang of the rail yard, the barking of a dog, faded behind her, replaced by the whisper of the wind in the high branches and the steady, rhythmic crunch of her own boots on the rocky soil. She walked with a purpose that was born not of a clear destination, but of a deep, instinctual need for higher ground. Her body, accustomed to physical labor, settled into the climb. The muscles in her legs burned with a clean, honest ache. The weight of the bundle on her back was a steady, grounding pressure. She paid attention to the world around her with the focused calm her grandfather had taught her. She noted the granite outcroppings, their weathered faces streaked with lichen. She saw the tracks of a deer pressed into the soft earth near a stream. She watched a hawk circle on an updraft, its wings barely moving as it rode the invisible currents of the air. This was a landscape that demanded respect. It was vast and indifferent, a world of stone and sky that had existed long before she was born and would remain long after she was gone. There was a comfort in that, a kind of freedom. No one in this wilderness knew her name or her history. She was just a small, moving figure in a vast and ancient place. By midday, she had climbed above the thickest of the forest into a region of stunted, wind-scoured pines, and open meadows dotted with wildflowers. She stopped by a small, clear spring to refill her canteen and eat a piece of bread she had saved. From here, she could see the whole of the valley laid out below. Cottonwood Bend was a neat grid of streets and rooftops, the railroad, a thin silver ribbon running through it. The house she had left was an indistinct shape among others, a part of a life that already felt distant and unreal. She felt no anger, no self-pity. There was only the simple, undeniable fact of her own existence. She was here, on this mountain, with $17 and the strength of her own 2 hands. As the sun began to dip toward the western peaks, casting long, dramatic shadows across the canyons, she finally reached the ridge she had been seeking. It was a high, exposed spine of rock, the last stand of trees, giving way to alpine tundra. And there, built into a shallow declivity on the eastern face, was what she had come for: the abandoned dugout of the old Croft mining claim. The claim, and the dugout that served as its shelter, was a piece of local lore, a story told to scare children about the crazy old miner who tried to dig a fortune out of solid granite. Silas Croft had died decades ago, and his claim was considered worthless, the deed filed away and forgotten in the county clerk's office. The next morning, Lucy walked back down the mountain, her steps lighter now, her purpose clear. She entered the clapboard building that housed the town's administrative offices. The clerk, a balding man named Mr. Peterson, with ink stains on his fingers, looked up from his paperwork, peering at her over his spectacles. "Can I help you, miss?" he asked, his tone betraying his surprise at seeing a young woman alone in his office. "I'd like to purchase the deed to the old Croft claim," Lucy said, her voice steady. He blinked. "The Croft claim? Up on Widow's Ridge? Child, there's nothing up there but rock and wind. The vein played out 60 years ago." "I'm aware of that," Lucy said. "I'd still like to buy it." He shrugged, a gesture of weary resignation. It was not his business to question the follies of others. He shuffled through a dusty cabinet and produced a yellowed, brittle document. "The filing fee and back taxes come to $15, he said, a hint of pity in his voice. He clearly thought he was taking advantage of a foolish girl. Lucy untied her pouch and counted out the coins onto the counter. The sound was small and final. He carefully copied the details into a new ledger, wrote her name, Lucy Hayes, on the line marked Owner, and pushed the deed toward her. She had just spent nearly all her money on a hole in the ground that everyone in town knew was worthless. She now had $2 to her name. She folded the document, placed it carefully inside her shirt, and walked out into the sunlight. The legal owner of a piece of the mountain. The climb back up felt different. It was no longer a flight, but a homecoming. When she reached the dugout, she saw it not as a ruin, but as a project. The structure was little more than a cave, with a man-made facade. The back and side walls were the living rock of the mountain itself. The front wall and the chimney stack were built of dry-stacked granite, fitted together with the skill of a master. Her grandfather would have approved of the stonework. It was tight, solid, and showed a deep understanding of the material. But the roof had long ago collapsed inward, a tangle of rotted timbers and sod. The interior was a choked mess of rubble, dirt, and the debris of years of wind and snow. The single window opening was a dark, empty square, and the doorway was blocked by a fallen lintel. It was a wreck, but it was her wreck. She dropped her bundle and began to work. The first task was to clear the entrance. The stone lintel was heavy, but she found a stout branch to use as a lever, using a smaller rock as a fulcrum. Slowly, painstakingly, she worked it aside, her muscles straining with the effort. When the doorway was clear, she stepped inside. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and stone. The floor was a mound of dirt and debris from the fallen roof. At the back of the single room, dominating the space, was the hearth. It was huge, built of massive, carefully chosen stones, with a deep firebox and a chimney that, from what she could see, was still clear and drawing. It was the heart of the place, a testament to the man who had built it. It was the first thing she would make right. She spent the rest of that day, and the next, clearing the interior. She used her hands, a flat piece of shale as a shovel, and the wool blanket to haul out load after load of dirt, rotted wood, and stones. As she worked, she began to understand the space, its dimensions, its character. It was small, no more than 12 feet square, but it felt solid, protected, anchored to the mountain itself. It was a place built to endure. The hearth was the anchor of the small dugout, a monument of function and simple beauty. Silas Croft had built it to last, and Lucy, as she cleared the last of the debris from its base, felt a kinship with the unknown mason. She ran her hand over the cool, rough surface of the stones. They were fitted with a precision that spoke of endless patience. The keystone in the arch above the firebox was a perfect wedge of quartz-shot granite, a touch of artistry, in an otherwise utilitarian structure. It was while she was brushing away the last of the fine dust from the hearthstones at the base that she saw it. One of the stones, a flat, squarish piece of slate to the right of the firebox, was different. It wasn't the stone itself, but the mortar, or lack thereof. While the other stones were sealed with a hardened mixture of clay and lime, this one was set in what looked like dry, packed dirt. It was a subtle difference, one that anyone else might have overlooked. But Lucy had spent a childhood learning the language of stone and mortar from her grandfather. She knew the look and feel of a proper joint. This was wrong. It was deliberate. Her heart began to beat a little faster. She remembered Elias tapping on a wall, listening for a hollow sound, telling her, a wall should speak with one voice. She knelt and tapped the stone with the handle of her chipping hammer. Instead of the solid thud of the others, it made a dull, hollow sound. There was a space behind it. Using the sharp end of the hammer, she carefully began to chip away at the packed dirt in the seam. It crumbled easily. After a few minutes of patient work, she was able to get her fingers into the gap. The stone was heavy, but it shifted. She worked it back and forth, loosening it from its bed, until she could pull it free. Behind it was a dark, rectangular cavity, about the size of a small bread box, and inside that cavity, wrapped in what looked like oilskin, was a metal box. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted it out. It was a simple ammunition box, heavy for its size, its metal cool to the touch. There was no lock, only a simple latch. She lifted it, and the lid opened with a soft metallic groan. Inside, the contents were packed with meticulous care. On top lay a small, carved wooden bird, its simple lines worn smooth with handling. Beneath it was a letter, a stack of folded pages tied with a piece of twine, and under the letter, filling the rest of the box, were coins. Not a few, but stacks of them, neatly wrapped in paper rolls. Silver dollars, gold eagles and double eagles, an impossible amount of money. She set the box down, and, with unsteady fingers, untied the twine on the letter. The paper was dry and the ink faded, but the handwriting was clear and strong. She unfolded the pages and began to read. To whomever finds this place, and has need of it, my name is Silas Croft. I built this dugout in the year 1884. I came to these mountains with my wife, Mary, and our daughter, Elspeth, seeking gold. We found a little, enough to live, but not the fortune we dreamed of. It was a hard life, but a good one. This ridge was our home. In the winter of '88, the fever came through the valley. It took Mary first, and then my little Elspeth. She was 6 years old. The bird in this box was hers. I carved it for her from a piece of pine. After they were gone, the world lost its color. The gold in the rock meant nothing to me anymore. I stopped digging for it, and started building with the stone instead. I built this place not as a mine, but as a shelter. A place to be quiet with my grief. I lived here for 10 more years. The money in this box is what I saved over my lifetime. It is $840. It is not a king's ransom, but it is an honest sum, earned with my own 2 hands. I have no kin to leave it to. I am an old man now, and my time is short. I will go down to the town and live out my last days, but my heart will remain here, on this mountain, with them. I do not know who you are, or what brought you to this lonely place. Perhaps you are running from something, Or perhaps you are running towards something. It does not matter. What matters is that you are here. This place kept me safe. It gave me peace when I thought there was none left in the world. My hope is that it can do the same for you. Use the money to make it a home again. Buy timber for the roof, a pane of glass for the window, a proper door to keep out the winter wind. There is good water in the spring, 100 yards east, and the hunting is fair. It is a good place to live, for someone who is not afraid of work and their own company. All I ask is that you care for it, and that sometimes you remember Silas, Mary, and little Elspeth Croft, who lived and loved on this mountain. May you find your peace here. Silas Croft, 1898. Lucy read the letter twice, the words blurring through the first tears she had allowed herself to shed since her mother died. She was not alone in this place. She was the inheritor of a trust, a quiet legacy of love and loss. She gently picked up the wooden bird. It fit perfectly in the palm of her hand, its surface polished to a soft sheen by a child's touch. She thought of her grandfather's fossil stone, the memory of beauty held within the rock. She carefully placed the bird, the letter, and the coins back in the box, pushed the slate back into its cavity, and sat before the cold hearth for a long time, watching the stars appear in the dark square of the window frame. She was no longer a girl who had been cast out. She was a woman with a purpose, a plan, and the means to see it through. The ghost of Silas Croft had given her more than money. He had given her a foundation. The next morning, Lucy rose with the sun, her grief transformed into a quiet, focused energy. She secured the metal box back in its hiding place, took $20 for supplies, and made her way back down to Cottonwood Bend. This time, she walked not as an outcast, but as a property owner, with business to conduct. Her first stop was Abernathy's General Store, a cavernous building that smelled of coffee beans, leather, and smoked bacon. Mr. Abernathy, a man whose face was a roadmap of wrinkles, watched her approach the counter with a skeptical eye. He remembered her, the quiet Hayes girl. He'd heard she'd been sent packing. "Looking for work?" he asked, his voice not unkind. "No, sir," Lucy replied, placing a list on the counter. "I'm here to buy." He picked up the list, and his eyebrows climbed his forehead as he read. A good felling axe, a 2-man crosscut saw, a broad axe, an adze, a draw knife, 20 pounds of cut nails, a sack of flour, beans, salt, and coffee. It was a serious list, an order for someone planning to build and to stay. "This is a costly bill of goods, miss," he said, looking at her worn clothes. "I can pay," Lucy said simply, and laid a $10 gold eagle on the counter. The coin shone against the dark, scarred wood. Abernathy's expression shifted from skepticism to respect. He'd been in business long enough to know that money spent on good tools was money spent by someone who knew what they were doing. He said nothing more, simply began to gather her items, wrapping the sharp edges of the tools in canvas. As he was totaling the bill, a large, quiet man entered the store. He was Jedediah Stone, a freighter who ran a train of mules into the high country mining camps. He nodded to Abernathy and then to Lucy. Abernathy saw an opportunity. "Jed," he said, "this young lady just bought a heavy load, and I hear she's taken over the old Croft place on the ridge. I imagine she'll need a way to get this gear up there." Jed Stone looked at Lucy, his gaze steady and assessing. He was a man of few words, known for his reliability and the strength of his mules. He looked at her small frame, then at the pile of heavy tools. "The trail to the Croft dugout is steep and washed out in places," he said, his voice a low rumble. "It's a hard pull for the team." "I'll pay you a fair price," Lucy said. $2 for the trip. It was a good offer, and they both knew it. He considered for a moment, then gave a slow nod. "I'll have the team loaded, and be ready to leave in an hour." While Jed prepared his mules, Lucy made one more stop. She went to the small office of the town doctor, a kind, elderly man named Doc Evans. She bought a small kit from him, bandages, carbolic salve, laudanum, and a surgical needle with catgut thread. It was a practical purchase, an acknowledgement of the risks of the work ahead. When she returned to the general store, Jed had 3 sturdy mules packed and ready, her supplies expertly balanced and lashed down. The journey up the mountain was slow and arduous, Jed leading the animals, Lucy walking alongside, but there was a deep satisfaction in it. She was not just hauling supplies, she was bringing a home back to life. The rebuilding began with the roof. It was the most critical and difficult task, one she could not have managed alone. Jed Stone, having delivered the supplies, proved to be more than just a freighter. After unhitching his mules to graze, he looked at the ruined dugout and then at the pile of new tools. "You plan to raise these beams yourself?" he asked, a note of disbelief in his voice. "I do," Lucy said. He grunted, a sound that could have meant anything, and picked up the felling axe. He tested its weight, ran a thumb over the factory's sharp edge. "A good axe," he said. "Let's find some good trees." For the next week, an unlikely partnership formed on the high ridge. Jed, a man of immense physical strength, and Lucy, with her quiet competence and her grandfather's knowledge, worked from sunup to sundown. Lucy showed him which pines were the straightest and strongest, how to site them to fall cleanly without getting hung up in other trees. Together, they worked the 2-man crosscut saw, its rhythmic song the only sound in the mountain silence. They felled 10 perfectly straight lodgepole pines, limbed them, and with the help of the mules, dragged the logs to the dugout. The most difficult part was raising the ridgepole, a heavy 30-foot log that would be the spine of the new roof. They built a ramp of earth and rock, and, with ropes and levers and the straining muscles of both human and mule, they slowly, carefully, worked the massive timber into place atop the stone walls. It was dangerous, exhausting work. But when the ridgepole finally settled into the notches Lucy had painstakingly carved, a shared look of triumph passed between them. Jed stayed for 3 more days, helping her set the rafters, his raw power guided by her precise instructions. He refused any pay beyond the freighting fee. "Call it a neighborly investment," he said, before leading his mules back down the trail. A woman living this high up ought to have a solid roof over her head. With the main structure in place, Lucy worked alone, her days falling into a rhythm of satisfying labor. She used the adzes and broadaxe to flatten the tops of the rafters, then laid down decking made of smaller logs, split in half. She covered this with a layer of pine boughs and then, using the technique she'd seen on old sod-roofed cabins, she laid down thick squares of tundra turf, grass side down, followed by a top layer, grass side up. The roof, thick and green, looked as if it had grown there, a living part of the mountain itself. She built a door from thick planks, using wooden pegs and iron hinges she'd bought from Abernathy. For the window, she built a sturdy frame and, for now, stretched a piece of oiled canvas over it, which let in a soft, diffused light. Inside, she mixed clay and grass to chink the gaps in the stone walls, making the small room airtight and snug. One afternoon, as she was fitting the door, she had another visitor. It was Sarah Miller, a widow who ran the town's small boarding house. She had ridden a horse up the trail, a large basket tied to her saddle. "Jed Stone told me a girl was building a home on the summit," she said, her smile warm and genuine. "I thought you might appreciate a meal you didn't have to cook yourself." Inside the basket was a roasted chicken, a loaf of fresh bread, a jar of apple butter, and a small apple pie. It was the kindest gesture Lucy had received from another person in years. They sat on a log outside the dugout, and Lucy, who had grown accustomed to solitude, found herself talking, telling Sarah about her grandfather and the things he had taught her. Sarah, in turn, told her stories of Silas Croft, whom she remembered as a sad, quiet old man who kept to himself. "People thought he was strange," she said, "but my mother always said he was just a man with a broken heart." That visit was the first of many. The community below, which had cast her out, was now reaching up to her, one person at a time. Doc Evans made the climb one day, ostensibly to check on a sheepherder in a nearby valley, but he stopped at her cabin, sharing a cup of coffee and leaving her with a bottle of quinine. "Winters are hard up here," he'd said gruffly. "A body needs to be prepared." Jed Stone made it a regular practice to leave a bundle of mail and newspapers for her at the bottom of the trail, whenever he passed. She was no longer Lucy Hayes, the orphan. She was becoming the woman on the mountain, a person defined not by what she had lost, but by what she was building. As autumn painted the aspens, in strokes of brilliant gold and fiery orange, the dugout was transformed. It was no longer a ruin, but a home, solid and warm, nestled into the side of the mountain, as if it had always been there. Lucy had built shelves into the rock wall, which now held her meager supplies, neatly arranged. A small, sturdy table and a three-legged stool, crafted from leftover pine, stood near the hearth. She had even built a bed frame in the corner, a simple platform of wood, softened with a thick mattress of pine boughs and her wool blanket. The routines of her life were dictated by the sun and the seasons. Mornings were for hunting or trapping, checking the snares she had set for rabbits and grouse. Afternoons were for improving the cabin, building furniture, or stockpiling firewood, which she stacked in a long, neat rick against the east wall. The sound of her axe ringing in the crisp mountain air became a familiar part of the landscape. People in town began to speak of her with a kind of grudging admiration. They called her place Hayes Hold. She had become a landmark, a testament to a kind of quiet, stubborn persistence they understood. She rarely went to town, but when she did, to buy the few necessities she couldn't hunt or make, she was met with nods of respect. Mr. Abernathy always had a kind word for her, and Sarah Miller would insist she stay for a hot meal. She was no longer an outsider. She had earned her place, not through words or wealth, but through the undeniable evidence of her labor. Her hands were calloused and strong. Her face was tanned by the sun and wind. She moved with the easy confidence of someone who knows her own capabilities. She had discovered a strength within herself she hadn't known she possessed, a deep well of resilience that her lonely childhood had prepared her for. The solitude of the high ridge was not a burden, but a blessing. It gave her time to think, to heal. The silence was filled not with loneliness, but with the presence of the mountain, the wind, the call of an eagle. She felt a deep connection to this place, a sense of belonging she had never felt in the house where she was born. She was a part of its wildness, its enduring strength. One evening, as the first snow of the season began to fall, fat, silent flakes drifting down past her window, she lit a fire in the hearth that Silas Croft had built. The stone radiated a deep, steady warmth that filled the small room. She sat at her table, mending a tear in her shirt, the little wooden bird Silas had carved sitting on the shelf beside a cup of hot coffee. Beside it sat her grandfather's fossil stone. The two objects, one from the man who had taught her to build, and one from the man who had given her a place to build upon, seemed to belong together. They were relics of two different lives, two different sorrows, now joined in her small, warm home. She had become the keeper of their stories, the inheritor of their legacies. The first deep snow of winter arrived, not as a storm, but as a quiet promise, kept. It fell for 3 days without pause, a silent, steady accumulation that buried the world in a blanket of pristine white. The sharp edges of the rocks softened, the gnarled pines wore heavy ermine cloaks, and the vast, empty spaces of the mountain were filled with a profound and breathless hush. Inside her cabin, Lucy was warm and secure. The hearth drew perfectly, its fire a living, breathing creature of orange and gold, casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. The smell of pine smoke, coffee, and the stew she had simmering over the flames filled the small space with a sense of deep, abiding comfort. From her window, she could see nothing but a swirling curtain of white. The world beyond her door had disappeared. The town of Cottonwood Bend, her father, Agnes, all of it, might as well have been on another continent. She was entirely alone, and she had never felt more at peace. She had spent the autumn preparing for this moment, and her small home was a fortress of self-sufficiency. The firewood was stacked high and dry. The shelves were stocked with sacks of flour and beans, jars of dried berries she had gathered, and salted strips of venison. She had everything she needed. The long winter days were not empty, but full. She read the old newspapers Jed had left for her, her lips moving silently as she traced the words describing a world far away from her own. She took her grandfather's folding rule and designed a more intricate set of shelves, a small cabinet, a new, more comfortable chair. She would spend the winter months crafting them, using the hand tools and the pine she had cured. It was slow, meticulous work that filled the hours and brought her a deep sense of satisfaction. Each perfectly fitted joint, each smooth, planed surface, was a small victory against the chaos of the world. She was not just surviving, she was creating. She was making a life with her own two hands, a life of purpose and quiet dignity. In the evenings, she would sit by the fire, the fossil stone in one hand, the wooden bird in the other. She thought of her grandfather, Elias, and the quiet strength he had given her, the ability to see the integrity in a stone, the potential in a piece of wood. And she thought of Silas Croft, a man she had never met, but whose presence was a constant companion. She felt his grief in the solid walls of the home he had built, his love for his family, in the warmth of the hearth. He had left behind more than money. He had left a piece of his soul in this place, a gift of hope to a stranger he would never know. She was that stranger, and his gift had saved her. She looked around the small, warm room, at the sturdy roof above her head, at the glowing embers in the hearth. She had come to this mountain with nothing, an outcast with $17 in her pocket. Now, she was the mistress of a home forged from the rock of the summit itself. Lucy Hayes was 18 years old and had been cast out with what little her father called a generous start. She spent 15 of those dollars on a worthless claim and a hole in a mountain. It was, she knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, the best $15 she would ever spend.